In this video, we'll review some of the identification and uses of common lab equipment. We'll begin with this particular piece of equipment, which are called beaker tongs. They're used for holding hot beakers. They have the black plastic coating here to protect the glass so that the metal doesn't scratch the glass. Next piece of equipment are test tubes. Test tubes are used for holding or mixing chemicals, although in small amounts compared to for larger containers. This piece of equipment is called the pipette. It's very similar to an eyedropper. It simply allows you to add chemicals or anything to something else in a drop-wise fashion. This piece of equipment over here is called a hot plate. Hot plates are simply to heat solutions or liquids in a beaker or an Erlenmeyer flask. This piece of equipment is called the burette. The burette is used to measure liquids, but very accurately. Very accurately. The little markings here. There's a lot of markings in between. They can read down to 0.1 milliliters. They're very accurate. This piece of equipment is called the Erlenmeyer flask. It has a very distinct, almost triangular shape. Its triangular shape allows you to swirl liquids to mix without splashing out the top. Next piece of equipment is called the Bunsen burner. It produces flame, fire, for heating in the lab. This piece would be connected to a tube, and the gas would come through the tube. The Bunsen burner actually combines the right amount of the gas and oxygen to produce a very, very, very hot flame. Come out the top like that. This piece of equipment is one of several porcelain or ceramic pieces of equipment in the lab. This is called an evaporating dish. It's pretty wide and very shallow. And its name tells you what it's for. It's used to evaporate liquids. Most commonly, we heat it a solid that's dissolved in a liquid. That's called a solution. And the water will evaporate off and leave the solid behind in the dish. Okay, this is a familiar piece of equipment. This is a funnel. Funnel has two main lab uses. one is to pour liquids into a small opening. Second use is for filtration. In filtration, we put a piece of paper in the funnel in a cone shape, and then we would pour a combination of a liquid and solid into the funnel, and then the liquid would run through the bottom of the funnel and the solid would stay behind, trapped by the filter paper. Okay, this is our other type of tongs in the lab. These are the crucible tongs. Okay. This little diamond-shaped opening here is just large enough to hold another piece of equipment called a crucible. Crucibles heat things to extremely high temperatures, so they're almost impossible to pick up, and they retain the heat for a long time. So we usually take the crucible off of the flame and then we set it somewhere to cool. This is somewhat recognizable as well. These are called tweezers or forceps. And they're used for picking up small things. Next piece of equipment is called a graduated cylinder. Graduated referring to the lines on the side, and the cylinder is the shape. Graduated cylinders are used for measuring volume, how much space something takes up. Next we have a test tube rack. Exactly like it sounds. It's simply a place to hold test tubes when we're not using them. Okay, this is another piece of porcelain or ceramic equipment in the lab. This is the crucible. It's different than the evaporating dish in that it has a lid, first of all. Secondly, it's very deep. It has a small area here, but it's fairly deep from top to bottom, compared to evaporating dishes are about half this high. It's used to heat substances to very high temperatures. Which is used in the process of purification. When we heat things to extreme high temperatures, we often heat and drive away some mixed things that are mixed in, and we leave behind something that's pure. That commonly happens when we have what we call ores, which are mixtures of metals and other minerals, and we want to get just a pure metal out of it. Okay, this should be familiar. This is a beaker. A beaker is used to hold or mix or heat chemicals. It is not for measuring volume. Sorry, let's fix that. It's not to measure volume. The markings on the side of a beaker are estimated. They're not put on very accurately at all. Okay, our next piece of equipment is called a wash bottle. Again, like many pieces of lab equipment, the name gives you a clue what it's for. It's for washing or rinsing glassware. You can also use it to add water to something if you need it. It's really good for squirting water inside test tubes. Long, thin spout here. This piece of equipment is called the iron ring. The iron ring is used to hold up other things. It holds up two other pieces of lab equipment. One's called the clay triangle, you'll see that in a minute, or a piece of wire gauze, you'll also see that. Okay, it's a ring and it's made out of iron. Well, now it's made out of steel nowadays, but we still call it the iron ring. This is the wire gauze. This particular picture shows a piece of wire gauze that has like a ceramic middle. Some pieces of wire gauze are just metal all the way across. Okay. The wire gauze sits on top of the iron ring. And just simply holds a beaker over a Bunsen burner so that you can heat it. So it holds a beaker up over a flame. Next piece of equipment, it's called the scupula or spatula. This particular shape is a cross between a scoop and a spatula. That's why the name scupula. And it's used for scooping or transferring, whatever word you prefer to use, chemicals. You would scoop solid chemicals out of one container and transfer them somewhere else. Okay, this piece of equipment is called a well plate. This one holds small amounts of chemicals. Okay, we can run multiple chemical reactions at the same time. A lot of times in chemistry, we just simply want to observe something happening, and this lets us do by each of these. This is a 24 well plate. Each of these is fairly deep and can hold several milliliters of a liquid. And this way we can run several reactions at the same time or do multiples of the same reaction, depending if we're doing an experiment or something. So it's useful, it saves a lot of money if you're using expensive chemicals and we just need to use a small amount. Okay, the next piece of equipment, this is called a test tube holder. Again, its name tells you what it is. The test tube goes here, you squeeze here, and when you squeeze it, it opens, and then when you release, it clamps down and holds the test tube so that you can hold the test tube in a flame. You can keep it holding upright in a beaker of water to heat it. The water's hot. That's what it's for. Okay, next piece of lab equipment. Again, after its shape, it's called a clay triangle. You can see the triangle. These little things here are like rollers. They spin around, and they're made out of a ceramic, so it's called a clay triangle. It has two purposes. It can hold the crucible when we're heating the crucible, or it can hold a funnel for filtration. Next piece of lab equipment is called the ring stand. And the main function of the ring stand is other equipment simply gets attached to it. The iron ring is the most common piece of thing. That's where the term ring stand comes from, because the iron ring is what we attach to it here. Okay. With the iron ring, and then we could like put the clay triangle on here. Put a little Bunsen burner underneath. Okay, and then we could like put a crucible on it. Okay, and then we could heat it. So that's what the ring stand does. Okay, these are stirring rods. Exactly what to think. We're using them to stir chemicals. Glass is very unreactive. Sometimes we don't want to put pieces of metal into a chemical reaction because metal, from a chemist's point of view, is a fairly reactive substance. The glass doesn't do a whole lot of reactions, so we use it for stirring. And that's it.